The Trump administration has launched an all-out war on Americans' civil rights. And organizations like the ACLU, they have not only been ready for this battle, but they have been determined to make sure that they fight back. I got the chance to sit down with the National Legal Director, Cecilia Wang of the ACLU, to talk about the most important and critical cases that they are currently handling, and just kind of a deeper discussion about why this response from Americans has to be powered by the people. It's not just the battles that we're going to see in the courtrooms, but it's also the court of public opinion that is equally as important. Take a listen. Joining me now is Cecilia Wang. She is the National Legal Director for the ACLU. Cecilia, it is a privilege and an honor to be able to spend time with you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. It's really good to be together in these moments.
Yeah, Cecilia, I was mentioning I spent some time this weekend at the Human Rights Campaign. And it was incredibly reinvigorating for me to be able to spend time in community with like-minded folks that understand how important the fight is. And you and the talented crew that you have at the ACLU has always historically been in the fight, but it's been especially, I think, important and critical since January of 2025 that the ACLU has consistently been at the very front of this battle with this administration. I would just want to bring up some numbers for our viewers and our subscribers that are listening right now, because they're incredibly impressive. The ACLU has brought at least 162 legal actions so far. The number could have actually gotten up since the last time I checked.
To 166 as of today.
There you go. Breaking news on the Katie Phang news channel. ACLU, 166 total legal actions, more than 81 lawsuits with a 80% success rate when the ACLU has been seeking preliminary relief, which really has been the vehicle, I think, legally, that has been the immediate relief that is being sought during these lawsuits. And when we say preliminary relief, our viewers, Cecilia, they went to law school with me again. And so they understand that it's preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders. But Cecilia, talk about kind of the thought process, the strategy that the ACLU has been embracing when trying to decide what to do. I mean, it really is a flood the zone tactic that we're seeing from this administration.
Yeah, you're right. The harms, civil rights harms, civil liberties harms of this Trump administration have been so widespread, hitting American communities around the country. And so we began preparing actually to respond to Trump's second term in early 2024. We luckily or unluckily had the roadmap that the Heritage Foundation put forward in their Project 2025. And of course, we had litigated against the Trump administration, as well as some of the continuing policies during the Biden administration. And so we came in ready on Inauguration Day. And our plans basically were to challenge fundamental violations of people's civil rights and civil liberties. There are a lot of other nonprofit organizations out there, but at the ACLU, with our over 100 years of track record, we really wanted to prioritize going after those Trump administration policies that are illegal, that violate statutes enacted by Congress, and that violate people's constitutional rights. So starting on Inauguration Day, we filed our first lawsuit challenging Trump's executive order that seeks to bar birthright citizenship, right? The first of many actions by the Trump administration that are really attacking Reconstruction, the end of the Civil War, the idea that all Americans are citizens at birth in this country and have equal protection of the laws. So, so much of our work really has focused on those fundamentals of civil rights, where the Trump administration has gone after not only marginalized minority communities, people who are politically vulnerable, like immigrants and U.S. citizens with immigrant family members, or transgender kids who are trying to participate in sports, but also responding to something that's new with Trump's second term. And that's his all-out assault on basic civil rights and civil liberties that are the foundations of democracy, right? The freedom of speech, his attacks on universities, his attacks on lawyers, law firms, and the legal profession, his attacks on courts and independent judges who rule against him, and his attacks on media companies and journalists. That was, I think, the other major part of our strategy to respond to the second Trump administration. And that was something that is really unprecedented in my lifetime, at least, as a civil rights lawyer, and a place where we've really had to bring a lot of resources to bear in fighting back.
We always speak frankly here, and you are also a straight shooter, so let's kind of do that now. There has been, and you guys have documented and logged some pretty significant wins. And the district courts, the federal trial courts, they seem to be doing the laboring oar of adhering to the rule of law, respecting norms and institutions, calling balls and strikes the way that they should. But this is an entirely different climate, Cecilia, in Trump 2.0. When we have a SCOTUS that is hyperactive when it comes to the emergency docket, the shadow docket, and that seems to provide zero roadmaps for the lower courts to have to follow once they reverse things, and or they're contented with letting Trump continue to break things while cases proceed on the merits. How challenging has that become for the ACLU to be able to continue to navigate that particular kind of legal seas?
Yeah, I think that the ACLU, other civil rights litigants, and lower federal courts are really facing an enormous challenge with recent developments with the Supreme Court, particularly on their emergency docket. Now, the first thing I'll say, Katie, is that people should not give up on the Supreme Court. We had scored important victories at the Supreme Court, including on its so-called shadow docket or the emergency docket, where last spring, for example, we got the Supreme Court to stop the deportation of people that Trump was trying to deport using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, right? One of the notable victories for civil rights plaintiffs or litigants at the Supreme Court on the emergency docket. And so, we went to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis, literally was typing the papers to file in the Supreme Court when we received word from our colleague at the ACLU of Texas, who was in the parking lot at the detention center in southern Texas, who said, just file it. I see them leaving on buses.
Unbelievable.
ICE taking men to be deported to this gulag in El Salvador. And so we filed this stay application, and the Supreme Court ruled, after midnight Eastern time, that the Trump administration should immediately stop all the deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. So that was a key victory, and one of the cases where the Supreme Court, at least last spring, was willing to hold the Trump administration, the executive branch, accountable and to say, we are going to issue an order on our emergency docket to preserve the rights, prevent these irreparable harms to these men that the Trump administration is trying to deport. So that's the first point I want to make. Don't count the Supreme Court out. There are important victories we've won at the Supreme Court on the merits calendar as well. But I'll say this, the trend line, admittedly, is very troubling. If you look at the more recent decisions that the Supreme Court has issued on its emergency docket, I think the Supreme Court really hit bottom with its stay order, granting the Trump administration's request to stay the lower court temporary restraining order we won in a case challenging racial profiling by the Trump administration. This was an appalling decision that has left all Latino residents of Southern California, Central District of California, at risk of being stopped simply because they appear to be Latino, because they speak Spanish or they speak English with a Spanish accent, and because they work a low-wage job that ICE says indicates that they might be undocumented immigrants, and because they're simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, because the Trump administration was targeting bus stops, Home Depot parking lots, car washes, really based on their own say-so, that these are places where undocumented immigrants congregate. We went into court and won this lower court order, which was a very well-reasoned district court order that said the court is going to put a pause on ICE's use of this four-factor profile, including racial profiling. And the Supreme Court, of course, stayed that district court order. That really, to me, is a very disturbing sign of the kinds of orders that the Supreme Court is issuing that ignore the irreparable and deep harms to people of color, to other people who are suing the Trump administration, and is really letting the Trump administration move forward with these policies and practices that violate fundamental civil rights. The notion, the guarantee that we have as Americans that we are not going to be stopped by the police or by federal agents or federal troops because of the color of our skin. So I think that, we all need to really watch carefully and express our views. The Supreme Court, if it goes down this road and continues to issue stay orders that are like the ICE raids order instead of like the alien enemies order, ignoring harms to civil rights litigants and to Americans around the country, and giving the Trump administration carte blanche, at least on a temporary basis, that's something I think that is not going to sit well with a majority of the American public.
I'm glad that you're highlighting the fact that this Trump term is actually defined in a more nuanced way when it comes to the attacks on civil liberties, because it actually goes to the basic civil rights that we have. I think a lot of us have for a very long time taken for granted concepts like due process. And due process seems to be the common denominator that's at issue with several of the cases that you guys have brought at the ACLU. And it seems to be a wholesale disregard and a disrespect for the United States Constitution's language. The irony doesn't escape me that Republicans, especially and the right, love to talk about how leftist judges are activist judges or leftist liberal lawyers are disregarding things. And yet the reality is there has been a wholesale disregard for the strict construction of the United States Constitution's language and what it guarantees for all people, regardless of citizenship, for example. How have you all at the ACLU been able to also handle what I like to call the court of public opinion? It's something that I think is an important thing that we should recognize, that a lot of the battles that the Trump administration has been waging, they've done with propaganda in the court of public opinion. So not only have they been dragged into court by incredible organizations like yours for their failure to respect the laws, but then they've kind of been waging their own battles in the court of public opinion.
That's right. I think that the Trump administration has really been pretty shameless about asserting, their messaging frame around so many fundamental civil rights and civil liberties in order to play a game of us versus them, when what we're really trying to do is uphold the rights of all. If you're someone that the Trump administration considers disfavored, this is now includes, as I said, not just politically vulnerable minority groups like immigrants and mixed status families in the U.S., but also powerful institutions like Harvard or the University of California, my alma mater. And I think what's really important is that, as you say, litigation has never been the be all and end all. I'm a Californian. I always like to use this wildfire analogy. If there's a wildfire approaching your neighborhood, you can debate, all the reasons why, we let the forest grow uncontrolled, or, there are all these reasons why policies got us to this point. But you've got to go put out the fire, when the fire is threatening your home. And that to me is emergency litigation. When we go into courts now in 83 different lawsuits, we go into the courts and say, please give us a temporary restraining order, please give us a preliminary injunction. We now have an 80% success rate where we've asked for that kind of preliminary relief. That can't be the end of the story. Whether or not the Supreme Court ultimately takes the case and affirms lower court rulings that we've won, it's really important for people around this country to raise their voices in peaceful protest, and for state and local officials around the country who are standing up for civil rights to get the support of the people. So the ACLU is not only litigating, but we're also a part of that mass mobilization of Americans in peaceful protest, and, advocacy with state and local officials, to say to whoever the government official is, we are standing up for individual rights and freedoms. We are standing up for a country where there's the rule of law. We're standing up for a country that comports with our founders' vision, including as the Constitution was amended during Reconstruction, that we don't let the president sick federal, heavily armed troops, heavily armed federal agents on communities in our country. We don't stand for the president trying to censor scholars and journalists who he doesn't like based on their viewpoint. On June 14th, there was the mass protest around the country. Over 5 million Americans participated in that No Kings protest at 2,100 events around the country. And we're part of the coalition of organizations that are organizing a follow-up No Kings mobilization on October 18th. So I think it's, the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, as you know, as a lawyer, fellow lawyer, they call them as they see them. They're deciding, they're interpreting statutes, they're interpreting the Constitution. But the reality is that the Supreme Court is, its legitimacy is really being eroded by its unreasonable decisions, and it's leaving American communities vulnerable to the unlawful whims of the executive branch. And I will make a huge difference and follow up our litigation wins with the voice of the people, who ultimately are going to be responsible for the direction of the government of this country.
I've been pushing people to go to nokings.org to sign up for October 18th, because No Kings Day 2.0 is another critical part of what the mobilization efforts look like. It's not just the battles that we go and we fight in court. It's also the kind of taking it to the streets to show this administration we're not going to take it lying down. I did want to ask you, though, kind of something that just percolated in the media, which is the declaration of war, is what I'm going to call it, with no hyperbole, from this administration against non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that they are alleging, the Trump administration is alleging, are running a coordinated, quote, terrorist network. And I mean, that language is so inflammatory in and of itself. I'm always loath to use it, Cecilia, but they are targeting NGOs, people, lawyers, I mean, you name it, that are doing what the ACLU does, fighting for the basic civil rights of all Americans. But they're making it sound like it's a targeted, coordinated effort to be able to wield this exercise of fundamental rights in a way that's a threat, like literally an existential threat to Republicans and people on the other side of the political spectrum. What are your thoughts about the fact that the Trump administration is weaponizing it? I mean, even there's been calls by Republicans in Congress to create a select committee that'll be able to, quote, investigate it. It is a very McCarthy era-esque kind of energy, this like declaring everybody to be a communist and then dragging them into Congress and trying to prosecute them.
That's exactly right. And I think that the headlines that we're seeing today and yesterday about the government of the United States launching an ideologically driven campaign to target nonprofits it perceives as its ideological or political enemies is deeply disturbing, but it's really of a piece with previous moves that this administration has taken against journalists, media companies, universities. And I think the real fear that I have is that simply by making these pronouncements, President Trump and other Trump administration officials are trying to chill and censor the right of Americans to dissent, to oppose his policies, whether through direct advocacy or through raising their voices in peaceful protest. It's deeply disturbing, but I also feel confident, Katie, that it's not going to succeed if their aim is to chill groups like mine, the ACLU. We will keep on trying to hold this administration accountable to the rule of law, to the U.S. Constitution, and stand up for individual freedom. I think it's frightening that in only about 8 months' time, 7 or 8 months' time, our country is becoming increasingly unrecognizable.
Hmm.
With masked, heavily armed, militarized federal agents, National Guard being sent into communities, often, apparently because the Trump administration has, a political or ideological vendetta against local leadership, local elected officials. And I fear that, litigation, I don't fear that. I know that litigation is only one piece of our overall response, the response of the American people to say, we're not going to let, any one administration, any one federal official take our rights away, take our freedom away, and make our country unrecognizable. We believe in the rule of law and that no one is above the law, including the president, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, and these federal agents and federal troops who, I'm sure to their chagrin, to many of their chagrin, are being deployed against the American people.
We're living in incredibly dark times, Cecilia, but there's one thing that is, I think, a very apropos adjective to describe the ACLU and the work that you and so many others are doing there. It's perseverance. No matter what headwinds the ACLU faces, you all persevere. And what can you share with the people that are watching and listening right now to give them some hope? Because I do think that we are quick to acknowledge the problems, but slow sometimes to be able to provide the solutions. And I feel like the ACLU drives towards solutions.
Thank you for saying that, Katie. We work hard to drive towards solutions and to take concrete steps to hold the government accountable when it violates people's rights. The story I always tell as a civil rights lawyer is the story of voting rights. And so to shift away from the Trump administration for a moment, we have this case about Louisiana's congressional redistricting map up at the Supreme Court, and the states of Mississippi and Alabama also have filed cases in the Supreme Court asking the court to review wins that we won in lower federal courts on redistricting and the rights of Black voters. Things look, we're at a point, a potential inflection point where these states who diluted the voting power of Black citizens of their states have come forward and said they're really trying to undermine the fruit of the civil rights movement. So just as Trump is trying to undermine the Reconstruction Amendments with his attack on birthright citizenship and attacks on anti-discrimination laws of all sorts, these states are coming into the Supreme Court and saying that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, kind of the crown jewel of civil rights legislation in the 60s, that finally made minority voters and specifically Black voters equal under the law in fact as well as on paper. That they're trying to undermine that. They're trying to say that individual voters don't have a right to go into court to enforce the Voting Rights Act, which is contrary to 60 years of practice of all federal courts, including the Supreme Court. They're going in and saying that even where Black voters have gone into court and proved that state legislators discriminated against them, that there can't be any consideration of race to undo race discrimination. It's really sort of illogical arguments that these states are making. And the thing that gives me hope when you look at where we are now is that our ancestors in the civil rights movement, the Black-led civil rights movement, overcame much greater odds to win the progress that we have. When people say, oh my God, look at what the Supreme Court did in Shelby County versus Holder, this 2013 decision, that undid the federal preclearance provisions of the Voting Rights Act. It took our opponents, those who were trying to turn back the clock on the civil rights movement victories, 50 years, right? From 1965 until 2013 to knock out that piece of the Voting Rights Act. And now they're trying to knock out another piece of the Voting Rights Act with Section 2, like the core of the Voting Rights Act. And so, these fights have been going on since, the Reconstruction. These fights have been going on since the founding of the country. And they will keep going on, I'm confident, after I'm retired or gone. And we just have to keep fighting. There are always going to be government officials who are trying to take people's rights away, who are trying to undermine the rule of law or to hold themselves above the law. And we fight back using whatever tools we have. Often, I'm a civil rights lawyer, so I go into court to try to stop them. But all of us, all Americans, have some tool you can pick up. You can call your member of Congress. You can, volunteer with a nonprofit organization, the ACLU or another one. It takes constant work to perfect this union, to perfect our country. And it takes constant work to make our individual rights and freedoms a reality for all. And so we just keep going. And I know that the majority of Americans are with us, the vast majority, and will ultimately prevail. You take the interim setbacks, whether it's in court or an election, or policymaking, and we keep on coming at it again from a different angle. We keep on thinking up new strategies in order to fight back, and again, have individual rights and liberties prevail and the rule of law.
How do people learn more about the ACLU? How do they support the cause? How do they continue to show that they appreciate the work that your organization has been doing and continues to do?
So if you are a lawyer, you can join us in litigating against the Trump administration and other government officials who are trying to take away people's rights and override the rule of law. But everyone can do something. If you go to aclu.org/peoplepower, you can see lots of different volunteer activities in your local area or things you can do from home. And again, October 18th, we've got another No Kings protest, which you've already publicized a minute ago. And I encourage everyone to do whatever you can. There's so many different tools. There's so many different activities that we all can partake in. I have a cousin who has taken it upon herself and her local community to raise money for nonprofits that are fighting back in support of civil rights and civil liberties by, having a pub trivia night or a battle of the bands in their neighborhood. So there's so many things that you can do, and lots of options are at aclu.org/peoplepower.
Cecilia Wang, thank you again for the privilege of your time. And thank you for being such a tireless advocate for all Americans, even those that maybe don't appreciate the work that you're doing. That is the irony. The work that the ACLU does is not for just a select group of people, even though they may represent specific litigants. The work of the ACLU is for all Americans to ensure that their basic civil rights are always protected and respected. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Always. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.